Hey guys, this is Zachary O'Connor for CG Tuts, and today we're going to be making a glass text effect with some interior rendering techniques inside of Cinema 4D. We're going to start off by creating the room. After that we're going to pop some text in there. We will then set up our lighting rig, and we'll make some materials straight after. Then we'll just go through some very standard render settings. We'll render it out and then we'll pop straight into Photoshop, do some post work, and that'll be it. Tutorial will run for around 30 minutes, maybe a little bit less, and it is going to be aimed at the beginner sort of user of Cinema 4D, so nothing too stressful. So we'll pop into Cinema straight away.
So here we are in Cinema, guys. There's a couple of things I'm going to do just before we start. I'm going to set my DisplayPort aspect ratio to 16:9. The reason I do that is you can see these dark sort of bars on the edges of the viewport, and that really distracts me. So I'm just going to go to our render settings, change that to 1280 by 720. That is just completely personal preference. It may not bother you having those bars there, but it does me. I'm also just going to change our display to ground shading with lines. Once again, just personal preference, the way I like to work. So we can get started on this. To create the room that our text is going to sit in, we're just going to create a cube, and basically we're just going to punch a hole straight through the middle of it, and what's left over will just be our walls. So I'm going to come to our attributes, and I'm going to make the size on the X about 600 centimeters. The Y I'm going to make 240. The reason I make it 240 is a standard room is 2.4 meters, so we're going to try and go for some degree of realism, so we'll use that, and just make the Z 600 meters as well. 600 centimeters, sorry, 600 meters, that's a very big room. Just press C on that object, that will make it editable, or alternatively you can press this little button that is up here. So with that selected, I'm going to grab the polygon selection tool. I'm just going to grab the top and the bottom face, and I'm going to right click and go extrude inner and just pull it in a little bit. Doesn't really matter how much you pull it in, just not too much. With those two faces still selected, I'll just delete them, and we will be left with this polygon, but as you can see there are it's not really closed, like the edges here are still open. So I'm going to go to our points tool and right click, and we're going to go to our bridge function, and basically all we have to do is just drag from one point to another, and it'll add a line between them, and we can just go around the whole entire shape and click and drag until we have the whole shape covered up. And now you can see we have what resembles 4 walls. So in the object manager, just going to rename this as walls. I always like to keep the object manager looking nice and clean, having everything of mine named. It just helps you in case you have a lot of objects in the project. So as with any room, we need a roof and a floor. So I'm going to create another cube, and on the Y I'm just going to make it something very minimal, so like 2 centimeters. And on the X and the Y I'm just going to make it about 650 by 650. The reason I do that is just because I want it to be bigger than the 4 walls, because we don't want any light escaping between the cracks of the wall and floor. So just hit my middle mouse button to change views, and I'll come over to the front view here and just drag that to the bottom, and we'll rename that one floor, and I'll just duplicate that. I can hold control and just drag it up on the object manager, and that'll create a duplicate. Call that one roof, and we'll just drag it to the top of the scene there. So we just have an enclosed room at the moment. If I hold my Alt key and double click on the traffic lights on my roof, it'll actually just make it disappear. The red means that it will hide from the viewport, and the double red means that it will hide from the viewport and the renderer. But we'll just turn it back on when we go to render. So with this room, we need to make a window in the back of the room, and that will be where our main light will sit, and it'll shine inside the room, providing most of the lighting for our scene. So if I come to our walls object and I grab our edge tool, this is what we're going to use to create the cuts and whatnot, so we can just pop it through. So I press K, which is the knife, and in the attributes over here I'm going to change the mode from line to plane. And basically what plane does is let you cut cut through a whole object just in one straight line through the whole entire thing on a whole plane. So as you can see, we want to cut it on this wall here, so it's actually on the wrong plane at the moment. So we can just change it from XY to YZ. You see that is the correct plane. And so I can sort of judge these up where they should go. I'm going to pop back over to the front view. And just going to pop them in. Try and keep them, relatively equal. So what I'm doing is here, I'm having a look at this line that's coming straight down here, just going 4 cubes over. So I'll do the straight same thing over here, one line here, and I'll go over 4 cubes. So there we are. And now we've got those 2 cuts, but we need to actually make some going horizontally across here because our window does not go from the very top of the roof to the very bottom of the floor. That would be quite silly. So we'll switch the plane to XZ, and I'll just go about 4 cubes from the top and 4 from the bottom, and that will provide us with the window space we need. So we'll jump back over to the polygon selection, grab my selection tool, and grab that polygon on the outside, the same one in the middle, on the inside, sorry, and we'll just delete those. And once again, we have that problem where there is actually a gap separating our polygons. So we'll just do the same trick with the points. So we'll grab the point and the bridge, and we'll just pop between them all until we have the whole entire thing covered. And that pretty much is the completion of the room. There is really nothing more we have to do because it's just a very simple room. And I always like to group my objects. So I'm just gonna grab my top object, hold shift, and click on the bottom object, and just press Alt G, and that will put them all inside of a null object. I'll just rename that room. So there we have it. Now I'm also just going to create our text now. I will show you how to do it through the splines, because normally I would use MoGraph to do it, but I'm aware that not everyone actually has access to MoGraph. So we'll use a spline. So come to our spline options here, just come to text, and I wanted to choose a very blocky sort of a text because that will allow more refraction and reflection and whatnot going on with the glass material. It'll just make it more effective rather than having a real thin, skinny sort of a font. So I chose a font called Mullet. I'm not sure if that is how you pronounce it. I actually got this font from amateurmedia.net. There's a link on there. Accompanying it is like 4 other really good fonts. I think it's entitled fonts that are really good title treatment fonts or something or other like that. You can find it on there. So just going to type shadow as our text. That's just, I don't know, an arbitrary sort of word, no meaning behind it. And I'm just going to resize this to be about 125 centimeters. And holding down Alt with that text selected, I'm just going to come over to our NURBS objects manager here and drop it into an extrude NURB. I'm just going to make it quite thick, so we're going to change from 20 centimeters to say 100, very deep. And I'm going to come over to the caps tab and change the start to a fillet cap, the end to a fillet cap as well. And I'm going to make it about 2 centimeters as the radius and give it 3 steps. That's sort of going to give it a nice bevel, if you can see there. So just a nice bevel along the edges. And I'm also just going to rename that shadow, and we're going to pop into the front view and just align that with the floor so it's not hovering in midair. And I'm also going to come to the top tab and push it backwards. So there we are, and our text in the room. So if I just pop on the roof for a sec and we have a look through the window, that is going to be pretty much the basis of everything that's laid out. We just have to light and texture things. While I'm actually in this position, I'll just create a camera, and I'll click this little button here which actually make it active, and I'll just line up the camera properly by zeroing out everything, the rotation and the position. I'll just pull it back, maybe push it up on the Y, and then tilt it down here. We don't want to actually see the wall on the outside, so just position it to your liking. And I think that's about good for me. So I'll unclick that little button and you can see there's our camera looking straight into the room. I'll just disable that roof once again. So now that that's done, I think we'll do the lighting next. We'll leave the materials to last. So I'll come over to my light tab here and just make a standard light, and as you can see it generates right in the middle of the scene. And I'm going to come over to our top view. I'm just going to pull it to the very edge outside of the room, and I'm also just going to make that from an omni to an area light and change the shadow to area as well. And in doing so you'll see that we've got these little bounding boxes that have appeared. I just want to line those up so they're pretty much even with the size of the window. So I'll come into the front view just to do that much more easily. And there we are, very nice. And we don't want it just to be a plain white light, because that would make the scene very boring. It wouldn't have any color, it'd just be very dull. So I'm going to come in here and just make it a very light sort of a blue color, just like that. And that is that done. I'm going to pop over to the details tab here, and this is a very important step if you're going to be doing some sort of interior rendering, because a default light, its quality is very ordinary. You'll get a lot of noise in there and whatnot, and you do not want that when you're doing some sort of interior rendering scene. So if you pop over to the details tab, we can click this button, identical noise distribution, and on the fall off we're going to change it to inverse square, which actually has in brackets physically accurate, meaning that it will actually give you more realism than like a normal light would, and that's what we are going for. Now if we pop over to the shadow, this is also very important, because if you have a look at this, 8 minimum samples and 100 maximum samples, that is quite low. So I'm going to change that to, let's say, 20 minimum samples. And what I like to do is I also always just times my minimum samples by 10, and that's what my maximum samples will be. So I'll take it to 20 and 200. And for the accuracy and the density, I'll just pop those both to 85%. Accuracy is self-explanatory, it'll be the accuracy of the shadow. Density is how dark that shadow will actually be. So 100% means it'll be very concentrated. I like to just lower it a little bit. And that'll be it for that light there. Now we'll duplicate that light and we'll actually bring it inside here, if I can grab it, and we'll push it off to the right and maybe just rotate it so it's facing our text. And the reason we're going to do this is because if we just had one single light, it would only be blasting blue light through onto the text, and that'll be very dull, and you wouldn't really get that much detail out of it, because there would only be one light source, so the shadow would just be darkening in one single direction, and we don't want that. So we'll make a second light, it's going to be our fill light. We'll leave all these settings, the details and the shadow tabs the same. Just change the color to maybe a yellowish or an orange, something like that, just to give some variation in the lighting. So that's about it for the lighting. Very simple sort of lighting setup. And if we pop on the roof and jump into the camera and we take a look, do a little test render, it's not going to look very fantastic, because still have to put some materials on it. We still have to enable global illumination and ambient occlusion, and we'll put some color mapping on it, things like that. So I mean, you can just see the very basic setup of that right there. I'll just stop it, not really important. So what we are going to do is we'll get started on the materials. So very basic. I'm only going to use 3 materials for this whole entire thing. I'm just going to have a glass texture for the text, a sort of like a wooden floorboards texture for the ground, and just a simple, whitey creamy sort of a texture for the walls. So we'll get the hard one out of the way first. We'll do the glass. I've actually had a lot of people, I've seen them ask about how to make glass textures in Cinema 4D. It's actually really simple. What we're going to go is our color, and we're just going to change this to like a really light blue sort of a color, and we'll jump into our transparency channel. This is the important part of doing glass. I'm going to change the brightness down just a wee little bit to 95 from 100. That will just allow us to see, like, not see through, but give it just a little bit of volume, so it's not just completely transparent. Because if you look at glass, I mean, you can still see the volume in it, and that's what we need to see here. The refraction level is 1.2. That's just the refraction level of glass. It's just what it is. I'm not sure how they came up with it. That's just how it is. And very basically, that is it. That's it for our transparency channel. I'm going to jump over to the reflection. I'm going to give it a Fresnel shader, and I want this to be very, very low, something like 15 brightness, maybe 5 mixed strength. I just want to get it so it has that little bit of reflection of stuff that's going around it. And specular, I don't want this too high either, so I just pop that down to about 45 and 15, just to take it down a little bit. And we'll just rename that glass. And we may tweak these once we get our final render out, but we'll wait till the end until we actually have a render out to see what we can tweak. So our next one, I'll rename this one wood floor. And this one we actually need a texture. I've just Googled an image. Sorry, no, I actually used Flickr. I used Flickr to get this image. I just searched on the web for it, and it's just a very simple wooden floorboards sort of a texture there. And I'm actually just going to copy that and pop it straight into the bump channel and paste it in, and maybe take it to about 25% strength. I want to give it a very slight reflection, maybe something around 6%, 5, 6. I'll stay at 6. And on the specular there, I'm going to take that up a bit on the width, because I want there to sort of be, light to hover across the whole thing. And I'll actually take the height down to about 15, just because I don't want those sharp reflections on the floor. You don't get those. And we can close that one. And our final texture, which is going to be the walls, so I'll name that walls. For the color, I want just like a really slight creamish sort of a white color. I think I'll go for about 6% reflection again. Our specular, we can change that to about 45-15 again. We don't really need it because we don't want harsh, sharp sort of stuff going on the walls. I'm actually turn that down to about 10. And an important one is we actually want a bump on the wall, but we only want a very, very minimal sort of a bump. So I'm just going to change the global scale. Sorry, I chose a noise shader for that. I'm going to turn the global scale down to about 10, and then in the actual strength of the bump, I'll turn that down to about 3-4%, something very, very low. So that's all we need there. I'm going to apply the walls texture to the wall. Now it is very, very rough and big, as you can see at the moment. So we're going to change that from the projection from UV mapping to cubic, and I'm also just going to press seamless as well. And I'm actually going to duplicate that to the roof, because we don't want the roof to have that standard grey sort of default texture on it, because our text will actually reflect that, and it won't look very good at all. We'll pop the floor texture onto the floor, and once again we'll change that one to cubic, and see if we need seamless. No, we'll keep seamless off it. And as you can see, I actually want the floor to be running the opposite way. It's running like left to right at the moment. I want it to run up and down. So if I click on the texture here and come to coordinates, I can actually just rotate that about 90 degrees, and that'll flip it. And it's also looking like the floorboards are very, very thin at the moment, so I maybe just double the length on the axis there to double its what's the word I'm looking for? Double its size, I could say. And last but not least, just pop the glass texture onto the text there. So that is our basic scene. That's what we're going to see. And now we have to actually set up our render settings. So we'll come to render settings, and our output is already set. I want to go to effect, not global illumination, ambient occlusion. Now Once again, the settings are quite low on this, so I'm going to probably change the minimum samples to 20 and 200 once again. Also just going to turn the accuracy up to about 75%. We'll pop on global illumination. Now, this is the big one. This is the one that's going to give us our sort of realism look to it, because global illumination is pretty much essential if you want things to look real. So in our GI mode, I'm actually going to change that to IR plus QMC of a still image. That will actually, how do I explain it? It gives you shadows in your global illumination. If I was to leave it as the standard, as just IR, you won't really get shadows. It'll wash out the shadows, but we don't want that. And I'll pop that diffuse depth to about 2. And irradiance cache, we can keep that at medium. And medium don't really need high because there's not that much going on. And then last but not least, we'll come to color mapping. And I'm just going to turn off HSV model, just keep it as exponential. So that is about it. We will actually have to pop up our anti-aliasing for the glass texture, because glass, if you don't have your anti-aliasing on, you get real jaggedy edges. The reflections won't look very solid at all. It'll be rather hideous, to be honest. So we'll go to aliasing best, filter still image of course, and I'll keep it at about 1 by 1 by 4 by 4. I'm going to need it quite high. So that is about it. Sorry, that's not about it. We have to set an output. I'll pop mine just on my desktop where I had it before, and we'll just call this glass text interior. And I'll do version 1. And we can pretty much just start the render of that. This is going to take quite a while because of the global illumination and the fact that our anti-aliasing is quite high. So I'm going to let this run through, and then I'll come back to you guys. Wait, sorry. I'm just going to pause it for 1 sec. I'm not sure if I turned back on our roof. I hadn't turned back on our roof. Don't forget to do that, because that's going to let light escape. So we have to turn back on our roof. So I'll restart that there. So I'll let this render, and then I'll come back to you guys once it's finished rendering, and we're actually going to pop into Photoshop just to do a little post work, you know, maybe pop some color correction on it, gradient maps, just a couple of little things like that to sort of just bring it to life. So just stay tuned for 1 sec and I'll bring it back. Alright, so there is the finished render of what we just did. It took around 35 minutes, and I do have quite a powerful machine, so it does take a while. It's that anti-aliasing that we have to chuck in that sort of gives it the problems. So with this raw render here, we're going to take it into Photoshop, and we're going to try and create something a little more snazzy, give it a little bit of flavor. Maybe just bump up the excitement a bit. So just loading up Photoshop here. And there we are. So just going to go File, Open, going to navigate to where I rendered it, just here, and there it is. So it's looking very bland, sort of one color, you know, we just got white and whatnot. So I'm going to start off by making a curves adjustment, and I'm just going to bring it down a little bit, make it a tad darker, and I'm just going to maybe pump up the blue. Actually, no. I think I'll leave the blue. I think I'll pump up the red just the slightest bit. So there we are. I'm also going to pop a gradient map on it, and I absolutely love this gradient here. It's one of the default ones, the purple to orange, and I'm going to pop that one on overlay and reduce the opacity because it's very, very strong at start. So let's just play around with this. Going to take it down to about 40%. Now that's sort of looking good. It's getting, you know, it's darker, got sort of like a vintage sort of look on it. I really like the colors it gives the floor there. Now I'm going to give this a vignette. So to do that, we can grab make a new layer first. We can grab our elliptical marquee tool and just go from the top straight to the bottom, making an oval like that, and press Control Shift I, and that will invert the selection. And we'll go Filter, Select, Modify, and we'll feather that by quite a lot. We'll go about 250 pixels, and I'll grab my black brush tool, and okay, we've feathered that way too much, so I'll take it back a bit and go feather, let's just say about 100 pixels. Also make this a soft brush, so that way we'll go around the outsides like this, and we'll deselect that. Maybe just take the opacity of that one down to about 80%, call that vignette. And I think we just need a little more, a bit of kick of color, so I'll use this very multicolored, sort of like the red to the blue to the red to the yellow, and we'll put that on screen and maybe take that down to about 10%. And I like that, just a little bit of kick of color. So that's basically all I'm going to do in Postwork. Very simple. I may just give it some black borders at the top, make it a widescreen sort of look. We'll duplicate that one and just send it down to the bottom, and I'll also pop a sharpen over the top of that. So I'll create a new layer and go image, apply image, and then filter, sharpen, and sharpen. Looking very nice, and we can save that one out. I'll save the PSD out. So Photoshop document, if I can find it right at the top. Save, OK. File, save as PNG. And one thing I really try to do with all of my work is try and do as little as possible as you can in your 3D application, because if I was to try and get colors like this inside Cinema, if I was to render it out and it took half an hour and I didn't like it, I would have to go back and re-render it all over again. So doing this sort of stuff in Photoshop where you can fix it up in a matter of minutes is definitely the best option. So that will conclude this tutorial. I hope you've learnt something. It is sort of aimed at the beginners, so just sort of helping them get a bit of a start off. So thank you for watching, and I shall see you in a future tutorial. Goodbye.